Hi, everyone. Today, what I'm going to reveal to you about the Lynette Hooker case is something so chilling, so calculated, and so dark that you will never look at this story the same way again. We aren't just talking about a missing person anymore. We are talking about a ghost ship called the Azura that was sitting in the shadows of the Soulmate while a woman's life was being snuffed out. The U.S. Coast Guard is hunting for a mystery boat because they finally realized what we've suspected all along. Somebody saw everything, and Brian Hooker's clock is officially at zero. The story you've been told is that Lynette Hooker, a vibrant soul enjoying the Bahamas, simply bounced off a dinghy and vanished into the waves on April 4th. Her husband, Brian, a man who prides himself on being a United States Marine, claims he lost a paddle, got confused, and drifted for 9 agonizing hours while his wife drowned just yards away. It's a tragic tale of a freak accident, right? Wrong. It's a lie that smells worse than the low tide in Aunt Pat's Bay. For those of you just joining this investigation, you need to understand the stakes. Lynette didn't disappear in the middle of a storm in the deep ocean. She vanished in a calm, shallow anchorage where you can practically see the bottom. Brian claims 2 to 4 foot seas were tossing them around like a rag doll, but the marine charts and every witness on that water say the same thing. It was like glass. He says he was desperate, yet he didn't jump in. He didn't swim the few yards to shore. He didn't scream for help. He just drifted. But here is the high-stakes update that changes the entire board. The Coast Guard is no longer asking nicely. They are hunting for a specific vessel, a neighbor boat that was anchored right next to Brian's boat, the Soulmate, on that fateful Saturday night. This mystery boat has been a blur in grainy photos for weeks, but we have done what the authorities haven't. We found her. Her name is Azura. Imagine you are on your boat finishing dinner, the sun setting over the Sea of Abaco. It's the night before Easter. It's quiet. Then you hear a thud, or a scream, or the sound of a dinghy being hauled up in the davits at a time when Brian claims he was miles away, lost at sea. Azura was the silent witness to the missing 9 hours. While Brian was busy crafting a story about tides and currents that don't exist, the people on the Azura might have been looking right at him. Why is the Coast Guard so desperate to find them? Because the physics of Brian's story are impossible. He claims he left the Abaco Inn at 7:30 p.m. By 7:45 p.m., he says Lynette was gone. But at 8 p.m., a group of witnesses saw a flare go up. Not from where Brian said he was drifting miles to the north. The flare went up directly over the Soulmate. If Brian was lost at sea, who was on his boat firing flares? This isn't just a hunch anymore. We are looking at a calculated timeline shift. Brian wants you to believe he was a victim of the elements, a confused husband who just couldn't paddle hard enough. But when you look at the depth of the water where she allegedly fell, it's ankle deep in some spots. You don't drown in ankle deep water unless someone is holding your head down. The hunt for the Azura is the hunt for the final piece of evidence that proves Brian Hooker was never lost. He was exactly where he wanted to be, and Lynette was already gone. The military-grade precision of a United States Marine is supposed to be unshakable, but Brian Hooker's story folded under the weight of a single plastic paddle. He expects us to believe that a man trained to survive the most grueling conditions on Earth couldn't handle a ripple in a sheltered bay. To prove just how insulting this lie is, we have to look at the 90-second miracle performed by Blaine Stevenson. Blaine isn't a Navy SEAL. He's a boater who decided to put Brian's impossible conditions to the test, and what he found should be the final nail in the coffin of Brian's defense. Blaine got into a dinghy almost identical to the one Brian was using, a heavy, rigid plastic boat. He waited for the wind to kick up to 20 knots, the exact gale Brian claimed made his rescue attempt impossible. With only one paddle in his hands, Blaine started rowing. In any high-stakes survival situation, every second feels like an hour. But for Blaine, the struggle didn't even last 2 minutes. He reached his destination in 90 seconds. Let that sink in. A civilian using half the equipment Brian had conquered the deadly wind in less time than it takes to boil an egg. So where was the Marine? Brian claims he was so confused. He says the waves were 2 to 4 feet high, crashing over the sides, making it impossible to reach Lynette. But the marine charts from that night tell a different story. The wind was blowing off the land, meaning the island itself was acting as a giant shield. In the lee of Elbow Key, the water wasn't a churning monster. It was a sanctuary. The locals call it safe harbor for a reason. If Brian couldn't paddle 150 yards in calm water, he wasn't trying. Or worse, he was waiting for the clock to run out. The confusion defense is the most pathetic part of this entire charade. Brian told rescuers he didn't know the tides, didn't know where he was, and was just lost after a couple of drinks. But we have the receipts. We know he was talking to people about flood tides and ebb tides with the precision of a navigator just days before. He didn't just lose his wife, he lost his memory of how the ocean works the second it became convenient. He claims he drifted for 9 hours, ending up 4 miles away. To do that in those waters, you don't just drift, you have to actively avoid every single person trying to help you. Think about the psychology of a man who watches his wife fall into the water. If you're 150 yards from shore and your soulmate disappears, you don't stay in the boat and paddle unsuccessfully. You jump, you swim, you scream until your lungs give out. But Brian didn't have a scratch on him. He didn't even have wet clothes when it mattered. He sat in that dinghy and watched the lights of the houses on Elbow Key, houses that were right there, within shouting distance, and he chose silence. He chose to let the darkness take her while he prepared his script. Every 150 words, another hole opens up in his story. Why did he tell rescuers she was wearing a black bathing suit when she actually had on a bright aqua cover-up and a blue headscarf? If you want someone to be found, you give the most vivid details possible. If you want them to stay lost, you describe them in the color of the shadows. Brian gave the search teams a ghost to look for, ensuring they would never find her in the dark water. He wasn't a grieving husband. He was a director managing a scene. The most chilling realization is that 3 different boats saw Blaine during his 90-second test and immediately came to see if he needed help. That is the boater's code. If you are struggling with a paddle in a bay, people notice. On the night Lynette went missing, the bay was full. It was the Saturday before Easter. There were eyes everywhere. If Brian was truly out there struggling for 9 hours, why did nobody see a frantic man in a dinghy? The answer is simple. He wasn't there. He was somewhere else. And the Azura, that mystery boat the Coast Guard is now hunting, knows exactly where that was. The physical evidence in this case isn't just missing. It was handed back to the suspect on a silver platter by the Bahamian authorities. When Brian Hooker walked out of that jail after 5 days of detention, he wasn't just carrying his freedom, he was wearing the smoking gun on his wrist. He was allowed to keep his high-end Garmin watch, a device rich with GPS coordinates, heart rate fluctuations, and elevation data. In a world where your technology knows your heart rate better than you do, that watch held the secret to exactly what Brian was doing during the missing 9 hours. Did his heart rate spike during a struggle on the Soulmate? Or was it calm and steady while he allegedly fought for his life against the waves? By letting him walk away with that data, the forensics team didn't just drop the ball, they threw the game. But while the digital trail was being wiped, the sky was telling a different story. At 8 p.m. on that Saturday night, the atmosphere over Aunt Pat's Bay was pierced by the bright, burning red of a distress flare. Brian claims that by this time, he was already a victim of the currents, drifting helplessly toward Marsh Harbor. But a group of at least 3 witnesses, people who know the water and know exactly what they saw, all point to the same coordinates. That flare didn't come from a drifting dinghy miles away. It shot up directly from the deck of the Soulmate. This is the psychological curiosity gap that the authorities seem to be ignoring. If Brian was lost in a dinghy, who was standing on the 46-foot sloop firing off safety signals? The trajectory of a flare is unmistakable. It lingers, it glows, and it marks a specific point in space. To have witnesses place that flare over the anchored boat while the owner claims to be miles away isn't just a discrepancy, it's an alibi-shattering explosion. It suggests that the accident hadn't even happened yet, or worse, that Brian was back on his boat, finishing a task, while Lynette was already gone. We have to talk about the motion sensor lights. Modern boats like the Soulmate and its neighbors, including the mystery vessel Azura, are often equipped with security lighting. If a dinghy was being hauled up into the davits, or if there was a struggle on the deck, those lights would have turned the bay into a stage. Brian's story relies on the cover of darkness, but he forgot that the Coconut Network is always watching. This community of sailors doesn't just look at the horizon, they look at each other. They noticed that the Soulmate wasn't a catch, as previously reported, but a 46-foot sloop. They noticed the lack of a seat in Brian's dinghy, making his rowing story physically impossible. The anchor hook of this mystery is the pure, unadulterated arrogance of the Marine title. Brian uses it as a shield to garner trust, yet his actions are the antithesis of everything the Corps stands for. A Marine doesn't leave a man behind, let alone a wife. A Marine knows that a flare is a last resort, not something you wait 9 hours to fire because you thought about it later. The sheer disbelief in the boating community stems from this. Brian's story is a fairy tale told to people he thinks are too stupid to check the Marine charts. He is betting his life on the hope that the owners of the Azura never check their email or see the Coast Guard's fuzzy photos. But the digital manhunt is closing in, and the data he tried to hide is beginning to scream. The final countdown for Brian Hooker has begun, and the walls are closing in from a direction he never anticipated, the missing footage of the Abaco Inn. We know the timeline down to the minute. Brian and Lynette were seen having 2 Cuba Libres each between 4:30 and 7:30 p.m. They weren't hammered, they were functional. Yet the Abaco Inn has gone silent, refusing to release the CCTV that shows exactly what state they were in when they walked toward that dock for the last time. Why would the Bahamian police block that footage? Is it because it shows a couple in a heated argument, or does it show Brian perfectly composed, already calculating the confusion he would later use as a weapon? The deception goes deeper than a few drinks. Look at the description of Lynette. Brian told rescuers to look for a woman in a black bathing suit, a needle in a dark haystack. He conveniently forgot to mention the bright aqua cover-up and the blue headscarf she was actually wearing. This wasn't a mistake, it was a tactical redirection. By the time the sun set at 8:00 p.m., Brian was crafting a narrative of a tragic disappearance, while the Coconut Network was already picking up the scent of something foul. Now, the mystery boat Azura is no longer a mystery. We know the name, we have the photos, and we have a message for the owners. The U.S. Coast Guard isn't just poking around, they are looking for the final witness to a potential murder. If you were on the Azura that night, you hold the linchpin. You may have heard a muffled cry over the water, or seen a silhouette on the Soulmate when the boat was supposed to be empty. You are the only thing standing between a liar and his freedom. Brian, if you're watching this, understand one thing: the ocean doesn't keep secrets forever. You fled the Bahamas thinking you could outrun the tide, but the digital footprint you left behind is permanent. The tick-tock sound you hear isn't just the clock. It's the sound of thousands of people across the globe analyzing your 9-hour drift and finding nothing but holes. From the motion sensors that may have triggered to the Garmin data currently sitting on your wrist, the truth is coming to the surface. This isn't just a story about a missing woman, it's a manhunt for the truth. We are building the village, one tip at a time, to ensure that Lynette Hooker isn't just another accidental statistic in the Bahamas. The mystery boat has been found, the timeline has been shattered, and the world is waiting for the moment the safe harbor finally gives up its dead. Justice isn't just coming, it's already at your door.